I'm going to have to reward those people. If I don't reward them, they're going to find another job very quickly in one of my competitors. That's going to, as those wages rise, I'm going to pull people from other sectors of the economy where wages are relatively low, typically because productivity is relatively low in those sectors. And so, as a result, much of the same phenomenon I talked about in China, increased urbanization, et cetera, we're going to see in India, of course with Indian characteristics, just as in China will happen with Chinese characteristics. But the general phenomenon will be the same. But the point here is a simple one. For us to have a sustained recovery from the recession of 2008, productivity will figure ever more prominently in the economies that we've already talked about. Indeed, one of the most interesting things to me about China is that China has a manufacturing sector that, by world standards, is not very productive. Output per unit of input is not that high. But can you imagine what would happen once it goes through the productivity revolutions that we've seen in Japan, the United States, and Western Europe? What the potential of that Chinese economy will be on the other end of that transformation that it's staring at right now. Similarly, in India, we're going to see similar transformation, not just in services. To me, one of the more interesting trends that's occurring in India is the phenomenal growth in its manufacturing sector. Similarly, I might add in China, while it's manufacturing that we're focusing on, understand that that manufacturing sector has huge demands for IT, back office, all this kind of stuff that India has otherwise supplied not only to its own companies but to the rest of the world. We're going to see a service revolution in China, and we're going to see a manufacturing revolution in India as those sectors simply begin to catch up one with the other. And they're going to, of course, aid each other along the way. I happen to work for a company called TCS, Tata Consultancy Services, their most rapidly growing operation on the planet. By rapidly growing by the number, the head count, the number of human beings employed, is in China. At the same time, if you look at Chinese investment, which is small but growing in India, it is coming into a manufacturing sector, higher, for example, on appliances, coming into a manufacturing sector that otherwise hasn't seen much foreign investment, certainly in this particular instance, an industry where Godrej and others have played a prominent role, but not very many foreign players, moving into an industry, and will bring with it whatever innovations have served it well in China and elsewhere in the world, it will bring into India as well. Expect the next step will see an ever greater attention to productivity, more output per unit of input. It will begin with manufacturing in China or services in India, but will spread to other sectors of the economy as well. But it promises for both economies major dislocations from huge portions of the workforce that are at least today concentrated in agricultural sectors. But to get them from here, the agricultural sector, to there, whatever the growing productive sectors of the economy are, there's going to be a massive set of transformations around education, etc., human capital formation that's got to be undertaken by both of these sides. I've already taken enough time. I want to leave some time for questions. So why don't I stop here? I'm sure I've raised more questions than I've answered, but I encourage you to either take any one of these slides as a point of departure or any question that you might have, or any random discharge that occurs to you, any question you choose. I think we have about 30 minutes or so for questions. Is that right? So please, questions. Thank you.
Would you prefer to stand there?
No, let's go.
Okay. Can we have questions now?
Do you want me to call, or do you?
No, you can call to the vacancy.
Okay. Thank you very much. I am Vinicio Santini from Costa Rica, Latin America, also Costa Rica, and Brazil. I have a question. My research here is related, and I speak Spanish, not Portuguese. I'm working here. My research is related with the institutional economy from Douglas North, related with the small and medium enterprise. when I take the model, economic model from Costa Rica or Latin America, and I take the model from Malaysia or Singapore or Indonesia, it's very different, because I have a big problem in my mind, because in Malaysia, for example, the institutional framework is very strong. The government support, have a big support, for example, for the small and medium enterprise. And when I see the all explanation about the manufacturing or any product, maybe behind of this product, the government have a big role. I know from for the Harvard School is very difficult to consider the institutional economy, you know, because for the neoclassic people it's complicated. But my question is, you think about the institutional economy is a good, I don't know what is the correct word, is a good idea, for example, to reduce the uncertainty, to reduce the international uncertainty, for example, for the economy from Asia. I don't know. Maybe you can have any answer for me, because this is my idea that the nation, the economization, have a strong institutional framework, and is more more difficult that any economic crisis have a strong impact on this economy. Thank you.
Why don't I take a shot at it, and we'll go. So there is no doubt that across these economies we see wide variance in terms of institutional arrangements. The one dimension that you're talking about, the role that the state might play, is far more pronounced, right, as you rightly point out, in the part of the world you're in now than the part of the world that you came from. The role of the state, however, goes through various ebbs and flows. And so we happen to be in a period of time right now, which I find most fascinating. I mean, look at the United States. We used to think that GM stood for General Motors. Now it stands for Government Motors. There is more state ownership in the automobile sector in the United States than there is in France. Now, that may change over time, but nonetheless, we find ourselves in an interesting intellectual point where the state has reasserted itself in a variety of ways. In this instance, the one example I'm giving is the state as an owner of assets, but in a variety of ways that I think are going to call into question many of those neoclassical notions that you too are calling into question. It's not just an ownership, of course. It's the state also as a financier through debt. It's the state as a buyer. It's the state as a regulator. It's the state playing a variety of roles. I think if you didn't come from Costa Rica, but did come from Brazil, you would see more parallel to what we see here in Asia. Embraer, the company I just mentioned, is itself a state-owned enterprise. Its biggest competitor is Bombardier from Canada, which also has state investment, but state investment of, as you would see in a Malaysia or in a Germany, meaning at a state, meaning a provincial level. In this instance, Quebec, not at a national level. Different political systems responding in different ways, but nonetheless, a very tight role for government. Each compete against the other, not just in the marketplace of airlines, each compete against each other in the World Trade Organization. Canada and Brazil have brought more cases against each other in the regional aircraft business than any other industry in the history of the WTO. There are 9 rulings. Not even Airbus and Boeing are going to ever approach the order of magnitude of this kind these sets of ruling. So the role of the state figures prominently in virtually every one of these economies I talked about. The question is when and how. In the United States, we're seeing it largely as a way to manage and mitigate the risk that we just have encountered. In other economies, Brazil to stay in the part of the world you're from, it has been a very active and aggressive role to basically build capabilities and competencies in sectors of the economy where the private sector was reluctant to invest. And I would only agree with you that we are at a point in time where I think all of those notions about the proper role of the state need to be questioned and brought back into the conversation about the role the state can play in growth. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Professor, for your enlightening talk on economy. Professor, I noticed in your table that there's one country that is not included, that is Venezuela, because according to some quarters, BRIC will be replaced by CIVIT, CIVIT. C for China, I for India, V for Venezuela, I again for Indonesia, and T for Turkey. What do you think of that?
I like acronyms. I would agree with every other letter in the alphabet that you just gave, except Venezuela. Why? Venezuela, as many of you know, is an economy in the northern part of South America that has a variety of exports, but is overwhelmingly dominated by oil exports. And 90+% of those oil exports come to the United States. I say 90+%. The current political regime in Venezuela, Mr. Chavez in particular, has tried to diminish Venezuela's dependence on one single market, the United States, so he's taken that 100% down to about 95. Percentage terms, a significant move. In absolute terms, modest in the extreme. The other thing to realize about Venezuela is that its largest foreign asset outside of Venezuela is something known as Citgo. Citgo is the distribution channel for the Venezuelan National Oil Company, and 100% of Citgo's gasoline petrol stations are in the United States. Venezuela is deeply integrated with the U.S. And thanks to Venezuela, Canada, and Mexico, add that to the U.S., I have myself now at 89% of U.S. energy, U.S. oil needs. The U.S. dependence on the Middle East has never been greater than 10% of our oil needs, and at the current point it's 3%. Lower than France, lower than virtually any other major economy. And so Venezuela has a heavy dependence on a single commodity, and that being oil. And unfortunately, Venezuela is now going through a variety of political transitions that are not dissimilar to the political transitions that this region went through post-97-98 financial crisis. And those political transitions, as you may recall, here in Malaysia, or if you think about Indonesia, those political transitions had huge economic costs, and I'm afraid that that's why I think it's highly unlikely. That said, when that acronym first came out, pre-Mr. Chavez, when Venezuela was trying to diversify its economy, taking its oil wealth and applying it back into non-oil related industries, I think there was a very good chance at that point in time that Venezuela could in fact, if not be part of someone's new acronym. I'm afraid that they've lost that opportunity, at least in the short to medium term. It's certainly an opportunity they may be able to recover from later, but I think what you've noticed in Malaysia is once you fall off the track, it's very hard to get back on it. And it's especially very hard